FM 90 is brought to you by Stanley Bank. Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, how soon is Uganda likely to have the laws that are urgently needed to manage the oil and gas sector? In one of the resolutions about the oil and gas sector, Parliament directed government to have all the necessary laws needed to regularize the oil and gas sector ready within 1 month. As of today, none of the bills which were expected before the House has been tabled, and MPs are now wondering whether government, and especially the Ministry of Energy, has ignored the directive. Experts in the oil and gas issues have indicated that Uganda needs more laws to be able to have a viable sector and also safeguard the resources that are expected from the sale of the oil and its subsidiary products. Government, on the other hand, is indicating that currently the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act of 1985 plus the oil and gas policy are enough to deal with the development in the sector. But government has also agreed that other laws are urgently needed to handle key issues, especially oil revenue management, adding that the bills to cater for these laws are coming soon. So tonight we ask, how far are we from getting the laws that are relevant for the next stage of the oil and gas sector to proceed? Also, what are some of the institutions that are likely to be put in place to manage this sector better? What are the other developments within the sector over the last 1 month ever since the debate in Parliament about the sector? Our guests tonight, Mr. Clovice Irumba, Petroleum Geo-Chemist at the Petroleum Exploration and Production Department in the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development. You're most welcome, Mr. Irumba.
Thank you, Edmond.
We're also joined by Ms. Gloria Sebikari, Communication Officer at the Petroleum Exploration and Production Department in the same ministry. You're most welcome, Ms. Sebikari.
Thank you, Edmond. Good evening, dear listeners.
Gloria, talk to us. The argument that is still going on in Parliament is that we do not have enough laws to handle the oil and gas sector, even at the stage where we are at currently. At the ministry, you have argued that we have enough laws in place. Could you justify this argument for us?
Thank you, Edmond. Thank you for tuning in, dear listeners and viewers online. Edmond, regarding your question, it is before I answer it, it's necessary to understand where we have come from, what we have done, and where we are heading to. There is a process that is in place and that is being followed to have these laws updated. Before I talk about the updating of the laws, allow me briefly to talk about the current status of our legal and regulatory framework. As you aptly mentioned, we do have the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, which was enacted in 1985, a law which was revised in 2000 to conform to the 1995 Constitution. This act provided a framework at that time. Remember, it was enacted in 1985, and at that time, no commercial reserves of oil and gas had been discovered in Uganda. So at that time, the Act provided for various, among other things, it provided for promotion of petroleum exploration, which was needed to get companies into the country to invest their risk capital in order to take forward and do some work to discover whether or not we had enough petroleum. Secondly, it also provided for licensing of those areas. Right now we have 11 exploration areas, and out of these, 5 have active production sharing agreements in place. So that act provided for this licensing that was undertaken in order to distribute that area with potential, which is the Albertine Graben, to the different oil companies to undertake their work. It also provided for exploration of petroleum. How would these companies carry out their exploration? And it also had limited provisions on development and production. Remember, it was, as I said, it was put in place before we had oil. So the provisions for development and production are there within the Act, though they are limited in some aspects. And then the Act also provides for the minister to put in place regulations, because not all the provisions may be aptly described within the Act. So in this regard, the 1993 Petroleum Exploration and Production Conduct of Exploration Operations regulations were put in place to further break down some of the provisions in the Act, and this continued to guide the operations. Then we also had production sharing agreement. We also have production sharing agreements, which form part of the legal framework for the sector. These are signed between the government and the prospecting oil companies, and these agreements provide work programs that the companies will undertake. How much data are they going to acquire in a given period? How many wells are they going to drill? And what are the budgets for these programs? It also provides for some commercial aspects. It provides, it has provisions for local content, environmental management, among other things. Then another set of frameworks that we have used to guide the sector are the other statutes related to environment, wildlife, land, income tax. You know, the Albertine Graben is in an eco-biodiverse sensitive area. So it is necessary that even as operations take place, we consider these other relevant statutes. So as a Ministry of Energy, we don't only look at the Petroleum Act and regulations that have been in place, but we say, what does the Environment Act say about, say, if you want to do a seismic survey, what must be in the environment impact assessment before this work is undergone? And then when we discovered oil in Uganda, that was in 2006, when the first commercial reserves were discovered, government felt it necessary to put in place a national oil and gas policy. And before this policy was in place, we had the energy policy of 2002. And this policy mainly focused on promotion, it focused on monitoring of oil company activities, and also capacity building for government staff in order to take forward this sector. So after discovery, government saw it fit to put in place a national oil and gas policy that covers the entire spectrum of operations. And this policy is what is now being implemented, and that brings me to the issue of the laws that you have talked about. The policy identifies key issues that need to be addressed as we go forward in the sector. It also has a set of 10 objectives that I won't go into now because of time. Maybe at another time we will be able to go into those objectives. But key among the objectives is objective number 1, that provides for efficiency in licensing. And one of the key recommendations under that objective number 1 is the need to put in place, the need to update the current legal and regulatory framework for the sector. That is where we're coming from to have these laws in place.
All right, maybe Clovice, you can talk to us about what happened in Parliament. About a month ago, Parliament ruled that no more negotiations, no more new contracts, no more steps even on those contracts that are already been signed until we have laws. But she seems to say we already have the laws that only need to be amended. What is the situation actually?
Yeah, thank you very much, Edmond, for the question. And I think let me first greet the listeners, because I had not greeted them. Good evening, listeners. The question Edmond is putting across is the parliamentary resolutions stopping the government from further engagement with regard to signing the contracts and undertaking other obligations until new laws have been formulated. It's true that we have had laws governing the sector, as Gloria has pointed out. What maybe I may say has lacked is information in form of sensitization to actually show people that these laws that have been in place have done a tremendous job. And the question of updating these laws arises from the government National Oil and Gas Policy adopted in 2008, which recommends that in order to take forward the development and production phases of the petroleum value chain, there is need to update these laws. Now, why are we updating the laws? It's not because they are entirely insufficient in handling the operations, but because from 1985, when this law was enacted, in the worldwide spectrum of the industry, there has been changes, and we need to capture those aspects in order to enrich our law. That was the main objective, but it's not true that there were no laws and therefore we have not been operating with guidance from a legal framework. That's one. Two, the need to update these laws takes into account certain aspects in the industry. For example, we have what we call local content or national participation, which is actually enshrined in the production sharing agreements, whereby once we are entering into a production stage, government is supposed to undertake state participation. In other words, to have interest in the production license. Now that means, in order for us to progress to that level, we needed to capture those aspects of local content and national participation very well. Similarly, we didn't have a very good communication strategy in place, and therefore the policy recommended some aspects of a communication strategy so that the sector can be well understood through a communication framework. What I'm trying to point out is that most of the aspects that we needed to update with regard to this law are not necessarily creating an unviable environment for operation. In other words, this law is still sufficient. But
the law that we have.
Yes. So, but we need to beef it up, and beefing it up in such a way that you are not really rushing. Because when you rush, you then have to repeat probably the same mistakes by having an oversight over certain aspects. And that is why later on in the presentation we may have to look at the formulation process. What has been happening since the adoption of the National Oil and Gas Policy up to the time when Parliament said we need the laws. Government has not been seated. We have been formulating these laws, and actually we were at the final stage of finalizing the bill when Parliament passed the said resolution.
Which bill is that? What do you call it?
The bill. Maybe I have to go through a number of them.
The title, only the title.
The title is the Petroleum Exploration, Development and Production Bill. But that is one. The National Oil and Gas Policy recommends a number of laws.
Yes. And
the Petroleum Exploration, Development and Production is one of those laws. Now, that is supposed to repeal the current act, which Gloria has described as the Petroleum Act of 1985. But in addition, the policy recognizes, based on its goal of using the oil and gas resources to contribute to all achievement of poverty eradication and creating lasting value to society.
Okay.
And in that regard, we need to undertake value addition to the oil and gas resources.
You talk about refining, and so we'll talk about that.
All right.
Gloria, some of the recommendations in the National Oil and Gas Policy is the creation of three enterprises: the National Oil Company, Petroleum Authority to oversee the industry, and the National Resource Fund, the National Oil Fund. How far are we going with this?
The National Oil and Gas Policy indeed recommends the setting up of three institutions: the National Oil Company, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, and a Directorate of Petroleum within the ministry. Previously, or currently today, we have the Petroleum Exploration and Production Department in the Ministry of Energy. Yes. So the PEPD, in short, has been and is currently carrying out regulatory aspects, policy aspects, and also commercial aspects, obviously working together with other government institutions. So as we go further in the sector, as the developments have taken place, we've discovered oil, we are moving into development and production. We realize that there is a lot more that needs to be done. So in line with the policy that recommends the setting up of these institutions, one which is the authority, as I mentioned, that will handle regulatory aspects. Then the National Oil Company will handle the commercial and business aspects, including state participation on behalf of government at the time of production, and then a directorate that will handle mainly the policy aspects of the sector. So regarding the progress of formulation of these institutions, firstly, I can say that the structures for these institutions have been defined. The National Oil and Gas Policy gives details of the different roles and functions to be undertaken by these institutions, and this has guided the formulation of the structures. And then also the new petroleum law bill that will be passed into law also will put these institutions in place. So when the bill is passed into law, then we will go to the next stage, the formation of these institutions.
When can we expect, for instance, the National Oil Company?
That will all depend on the passing of the bill into law.
When can we expect the bill to be passed? Give us some timelines.
Currently, the bill is being discussed by Cabinet.
Yes.
Yeah. So after Cabinet has,
it
goes to the House. Cabinet gives its recommendations, which as a ministry will work on, and then following Cabinet's approval, it will go to the main House. And the House has its procedure in which bills get passed into law. So following those procedures, the different readings, depending on how much has to be changed or updated, then it will be passed into law, and then the institutions will come into place. The important thing to note here is that we did not want to do a rush job, as Clovice said, to take a bill that is incomplete, and therefore it will come back so many times and make the process even longer.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the National Resource Fund. Do we have that coming as well? It's not directly underlined by the oil and gas policy, but it's recommended in other sectors.
The Petroleum Fund.
Well, yes.
Yeah, indeed, I must say that the National Oil and Gas Policy does recommend the setting up of a petroleum fund in the central bank in order to separate the revenues that will come from oil, especially at the time when commercial production is being undertaken, so that these revenues do not interfere with the economy, because one of the issues the policy recognizes is the impact of these oil revenues on our national economy. So in order to ensure that, to avoid these negative impacts, a petroleum fund will be created in the central bank.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Let's Clovice, can you talk to us? You mentioned a little bit about the management of these revenues. What insurance do you have that they will be spent well?
Yeah. First of all, the starting point is to have a legal framework, and this will greatly help in ensuring proper management of these revenues. The legal framework, as recommended by the National Oil and Gas Policy, is the Revenue Management Law. Now, this is being taken forward by the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. This law is expected to include the petroleum fund that Gloria has talked about, and once established in the Bank of Uganda, that will be one of the milestones with regard to how we are going to manage the revenues properly. At this stage, I've learned that the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development has finalized the principles for formulation of this bill by way of updating the Public Finance and Accountability Act. And very soon, I think this will also be tabled before Cabinet for discussion.
So you're sure, once the laws are in place, that money will not be abused?
Absolutely.
No one will come in the night to take it to buy things that they're not supposed to buy?
Absolutely.
All right. Listeners, this is Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight, how soon is Uganda likely to have the laws that are urgently needed to manage the oil and gas sector? Very two experienced people in the studios, Mr. Clovice Irumba, Petroleum Geo-Chemist in the Ministry of Energy, and Ms. Gloria Sebikari, Communications Officer in the Petroleum Exploration and Production Department. Very knowledgeable indeed from the Ministry of Energy. We're going for a break. We'll be back. You'll also be able to ask questions, and you can also send a text message. Type the word Spectrum, space, question, message or comment. Send it to 7197.
Just like an uncut diamond is brought to life by unmatched skill and dedication, only our brewmaster holds the secret to crafting a crystal malt lager. Under the exacting international standards at Nile Breweries, he uses only the finest, most carefully selected grains of roasted crystal malt and sets in motion the delicate process of releasing their full roast. The result is a world-class beer with a fresher aroma, a richer golden color, and a maltier taste.
Nile Gold Crystal Malt Lager. Beyond an ordinary malt.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
Is your internet provider turning your world upside down? Broadband Company offers fast and reliable internet solutions. And for the first 100 subscribers this month, we offer zero connection fees. Save up to 400,000. For more information on these offers, call toll-free 0800 222 111.
Broadband Company, more than you expect.
John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards his goal, opened his own garage, and worked, learning the hard way. His reputation spread. Trust, consistency, quality. Soon people were coming to him from all parts. He made himself and his whole street prosper, and also helped friends see the potential in people and helping them on. But John never shouts about all his success. He's just who he is. Special.
So here's to one like John, who make a difference, who enjoy Nile Special, the rich, satisfying taste from the source. Nile Special. You've earned it.
Not for sale to persons under 18.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back on Spectrum. Tonight, how soon is Uganda likely to have the laws that are urgently needed to manage the oil and gas sector? Our guests tonight, Mr. Clovice Irumba, Petroleum Geo-Chemist at the Petroleum Department, that is the Petroleum Exploration and Production Department of the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, Ms. Gloria Sebikari, Communications Officer at the same department in the same ministry. You'll be able to call in and contribute to this discussion, ask questions, or make general comments. I'll read out the telephone numbers when that time comes. Let's talk about a refinery. A refinery was supposed to be developed, Clovice, and we're still waiting for. When can we expect that refinery?
Yeah, thank you very much. Government commissioned a feasibility study at the beginning of 2010 in order to establish the commercial viability of that refinery, which says, can we be able to look at what is the complexity and the ownership structure. And the study recommended, among other things, that 60,000 barrels of oil per day refinery should be developed on a public-private partnership arrangement located in Kavale Parish in Hoima District, close to the oil fields, and a number of other recommendations. Now, in taking forward the project, government this financial year allocated some resources for the initial phases of the project development.
How much money?
And the money is about 14.5 billion that the Ministry of Finance allocated. And the initial activities include land acquisition.
Yes.
So to date we have undertaken surveys to demarcate the land. We have undertaken the process of acquisition through the district land board, and we have already submitted the application forms. We have been undertaking sensitizing the people